Welcome back, Red Spotters, to another show here on the Red Spotlight Unintended Podcast. I'm your host today, Alexis J. Soto, and I am joined by Mr. Peter Martinez. Mr. Martinez, how are you doing this lovely November Monday?
I'm alive.
That is the best possible news we could hear, especially on holidays when things can go pretty crazy. And today we're going to review Dr. Sleep, which is the sequel to The Shining. This is Red Spotlight number 197.
Oh, dear Lord.
We had something truly great in Dr. Sleep that absolutely bombed. And I mean bombed at this past week's box office. I think, what was the tally? $14 million? A 3-day tally of $14 million? That's less than what Blade Runner 2049 made in its first day of release, not including the whole tally of the weekend. Ah, God. What happened to the horror resurgence?
I don't know. Like that, honestly, the fact that it bombed so hard genuinely baffles me. I don't know. Like, there's much worse horror films out there just making bank. I don't get it. I thought the trailers looked good.
It's a Stephen King adaptation. Yeah. I mean, they blasted his name. It's a fairly recent novel. I believe it was 2011 when Dr. Sleep was published. They kept saying sequel to The Shining in the advertisements. This coming off It Chapter 2, which, while it underperformed when to its first film, but it still did very well at the box office, all things considered. Pet Sematary came out a few months ago as well, and I think that did okay. Not critically, but it just, you'd think that there'd be more of an awareness that this would be a thing that's out there and that people would be interested in. If we sound baffled, because horror films, aside from comic book movies, are the only genre of films that have been able to find a place at the table in this era at the box office.
Yeah, it's depressing. And like you talk about the universe, like that's where it feels like, damn, it's really going out of the way to show you up, because every other horror film can do well, but then this fairly big horror film that you think would easily make back its money just won't.
What's even more baffling is that it got a B. I think a B+ cinema score.
Yes.
A B+ cinema score, which, as we've mentioned before, cinema score is the most accurate survey of how audiences felt about a film as they walk out of the movie. It's like kind of exit polls, if you're into politics, you know what that means. And so a B+ for a horror movie usually translate to some pretty big bucks for a horror film. Unless you're an Ari Aster, in which case audiences just don't like your movies and they make no money whatsoever.
Hereditary got a D-.
Do you remember the score for Midsommar? I think it was higher, right, than Hereditary?
Maybe. I think it was in the C range.
His movies are truly horrific, I will say. Yeah, I really don't know what to say. I guess you could just chalk it up to the time of the year it is?
Well, here's another thing. Why did you release this film 8 days after Halloween? Why? The people are kind of just done with Halloween. I don't think they're not in quite the rush to go back to see a horror film.
Was this another Warner Brothers movie?
Yes. And by the way, October was wide open for a horror film. It's not like it had competition.
I'm going to try and get into the minds of these people. So, basic movie executive knowledge. We can't release a Stephen King movie just 1 month after another Stephen King movie. We gotta space them out. And then also, we can't let this Stephen King movie get in the way of our Joker movie, who we have high doubts about. Remember, because we reported that they didn't believe Joker would be successful.
Put Joker in November then.
It didn't have to come out in October.
It wasn't an October film. It still would have made the same amount of money if you put it in November. Whereas with Dr. Sleep, it could have gotten a bump from like, hey, everyone's like, it's spooky season. Like, I want to see a horror film. Let's go out. Let's do something. Well, the only one out there is Doctor Sleep. Okay, let's go see it. Give it a try.
You know what else happened? They were expecting It Chapter 2 to be a lot bigger than it was.
Oh, and they were afraid that they would clash with each other, or what?
I just think, like, if you're going to dumb it down, it's like, we might lose money if we have, two Stephen King movies so close together. Like, Doctor Sleep opening a month after It Chapter 2 could make less money for it.
Really stupid.
I mean, it's movie executives. What do you expect here? I'm just trying to get into their heads about what it was. Yeah, it's a weird time for this movie to have opened, and like, it's really a shame because when we'll get into the movie, this should have been an event. It should have been a motherfucking event. I'm sorry, I'm going to go there because, like, it's honestly a tragedy what happened to this. For everyone involved, and especially for the quality of this. I almost wish that this would have gotten the September slot, because, like, this was infinitely better than It Chapter 2. Like,
yeah,
it's not even close. It's not even close. So, and also, while I feel worse for Mike Flanagan and the team behind the film, it's also another blunder for Warner Brothers this year, where the only real runaway success they had was the film they thought they were going to make no money from. They made $1 billion, or they're about to, with Joker, but again, because of their everlasting ineptitude, they have to split it up 3 ways.
To be fair, on paper,
yeah,
almost every film that they put out made sense
this year.
Yeah.
And yet, what happened? They've all kind of
bomb after bomb after bomb. And there's some that don't bomb, but they just kind of like squeak by.
They underperform.
Yeah.
Really.
It's not even like small films. It's fairly big films that you would
Detective
expect more
Pikachu,
from.
Godzilla King of the Monsters, Shazam, Lego Movie Part 2, It Chapter 2, and now Doctor Sleep. That's 6 films. I'm sure there was more of them than that, but those are 6 films that are kind of from their key intellectual properties that they didn't bomb. Well, some of them did, but most of them underperformed from the expectations of what they were expecting, obviously,
And a lot of them were like pretty good. Some of them were okay, and a lot of them I thought were pretty great. And none of them where I was like, oh God, this is terrible. Like, ugh.
Unlike Disney.
Yeah. Like, I'm sorry, Disney made $1 billion of some of the worst films I've seen in my life. And that's not hyperbole. Like, the Lion King... Hyperbole. Sorry, same shit. The live-action Lion King was one of the worst films I've ever seen.
The live-action Lion King, not only is that, but I think it goes down as the worst cinematic experience I've had in my life.
It was pretty bad.
Well, I mean, I guess Finding Dory is pretty bad there too, but I mean, this movie, the reason why it was bad here is because the movie was aggressively terrible. Like, I'm telling you right now, like, Lion King will be my worst movie of this year.
Oh, easily. I just said it's one of the worst films I've seen, because there's almost nothing redeemable about it. Like, yes, the lions look realistic. That's it. Everything else is god awful, terrible film. Yeah, and I didn't see Aladdin because fuck that.
Exactly.
I've when it comes to Disney, I've stopped forcing myself to like see these things. You know what I mean?
There's no point to it. I mean, we have fortunately people in our network that will go see these, that we don't have to. Thank you, David and Alexis, for going to go see Maleficent, Mistress of Evil, and Aladdin, and Dumbo, of which I could not be bothered to care about at all.
But there's even bigger ones, like I'm not gonna see Frozen 2.
I mean, those are you're getting a little bit more about. I will see it because I'm looking forward to the film. But like, again, I'm going to go into it kind of like the way I went in with Ralph Breaks the Internet, where it's like, this will probably be quality, but it's ultimately unnecessary.
But that, like, Ralph Breaks the Internet, I didn't see it in theaters. It's on Netflix. I could see it at any time. I haven't watched it. I haven't cared.
Yeah. We have it on a digital locker.
Yeah. There's so many ways I could see it, but it's just like, and there was a little time where it's like, these films, make me mad, but I'm watching them and it's like, well, why am I watching them?
Yeah.
Why am I going to see Incredibles 2 if I'm like not interested in what this film has to offer? So I just, yeah.
And surprisingly, Toy Story 4 wasn't in that category of films that made you hate yourself.
Yeah, surprisingly.
Which is that's the one.
That's the one I thought I was going to hate more than anything.
Right.
And I was like, hey, it's not the worst thing. Okay.
I'll be damned.
Yeah.
So yeah, Disney has been pretty shitty. And then Warner Brothers more or less has been putting out quality product, and yet they've been just bombing left and right. And yeah, so with Dr. Sleep, I will remind people that we had a Halloween special earlier this year, or last week, I think, or 2 weeks ago, where we released an episode where we talked about The Shining, Stanley Kubrick's Shining film. And so if you want more context about how we feel about that film, I strongly advise for you to go back and listen to that podcast. That it was a very wonderful conversation. And as far as today is concerned, we should start out, Dr. Sleep is primarily a novel. Peter, did you ever read Dr. Sleep?
Reading became impossible at around like high school and then exiting high school. I have not read. The last book that I genuinely read was Dune.
Which, I mean, you're a big Dune fan.
Yeah.
When this a novel was released, do you remember what the reception was to Dr. Sleep?
Apparently, I guess mixed. As a novel.
So you didn't have any kind of expectations about what would happen in this movie? You didn't know any kind of story elements or anything?
Oh, no, I knew the story elements because I had looked them up a long time ago.
Right, before there was even talk of a movie.
Before there was even talk of a movie, I was just like, oh, what's this, Dr. Sleep? And then I was like, oh, shit, this is crazy. Yeah, and I looked up what the story was. But yeah, I knew roughly what the story was. I knew why he was called Dr. Sleep. I knew there was these weird traveling vampire-esque people that prey on the shine. Yeah, I knew that kind of stuff.
Right. And of course, I know nothing, as I always do. Kind of like Jon Snow, knowing nothing at all at any point. I will say that should be pretty clear if anybody is listening out there that we are not book readers, as we usually are not when it comes to these movies. So don't expect to be that much of any attention being paid to the differences that happen in the books. I will say that I have some details that may come out. I've watched some reviews that have said some things about a character having a larger role, but of course, this being an adaptation from that, there are of course changes. And we have this film, and I will say, getting into the film right now, directed by Mike Flanagan and starring Ewan McGregor, this is the most excited I have been about getting to watch a movie in months, and I absolutely love this film. It was an exciting experience watching this in an empty theater. An absolutely empty theater.
I will say, I feel like where we live is a pretty good barometer for your average film goer.
Mm-hmm.
So I know if we see the film opening night and it's 4 of us, okay, it's gonna have a bad opening weekend. But if it's packed, it's gonna be pretty darn good. Usually,
there are times where our party is 4, and we're the only people in the in the theater, So that is something about our Imperial Valley that we do get right. Apparently, you are right. It is a bellwether for general audience goers and what they like. So that's something to note. But we'll get into, the spoilers and all the details of this film. But I just have to say that I was captivated by every moment of what I was seeing by Mike Flanagan. He is truly, to me, a revelation. The biggest. I'll give you your moment. Give it a second. Okay.
Okay.
Give it a second. I know you're just jumping up around that. but I'll just say that what he was able to do to just seamlessly weave the different versions of Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick of The Shining is an accomplishment that I didn't think was possible. Many people would never think was possible. He created a version that not only makes both of those visionaries' versions coexist, but complements them both. Truly, I thought some quality and amazing filmmaking happening. Truly a horror film in some pretty horrific ways. The performances are all stellar. Some in particular, Rebecca Ferguson and Ewan McGregor, terrific. Even some cameo performances that really rocked our world, shall we say. The visual effects, the cinematography, the music, it all worked for me so well. This will be one of my top movies of the year. No question. And we will get into issues, and I'm seeing that that usually how it is, either you're like me and you kind of loved it entirely, or you're like Peter where you loved like the first two acts and most of the third act, but the things that happen at the end of the third act kind of got in the way of like overall loving the film. And generally speaking, as I've gone out of my way to go see some reviews, people have been either or on this. It's like either you're on Peter's side of it or you're on my side of it. But loved it. Peter?
Okay. Well, you yourself gave the compliment to the director, Mike Flanagan, calling him a revelation. I'd very much like to put it out there on the airwaves that he has a little miniseries television show on Netflix called The Haunting of Hill House, of which, when it premiered, I said, "Hey, Alexis, I think you'd really like this. You should check it out." With which then you replied, "Go fuck yourself."
Uh-huh.
Okay. I just putting it on record.
Well, for the record, I mean, we've mentioned Haunting of Hill House, I believe, every single week now for the past I don't know how many weeks. So I know that it exists. Mm-hmm. We've talked about this previously, and I did say that he was a revelation to me. Because I hadn't seen his stuff before.
Yes.
So but that's a distinction. I could have, but I chose not to.
Okay.
And I don't regret that, for the record.
All right. Well, it's on record.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It's on record. Yes. Absolutely.
That comment that I responded with still stands. Very much.
My thoughts on the film. I very much enjoyed the film. I really did. It's a film that's definitely stuck with me, and I think that's a good thing.
That's the sign of a great movie. It has stayed with me. I keep thinking about the film.
The issues that I have with it's still having difficulty like coming to terms with them. So like I feel like I need to watch it again. And what sucks with films is I think when you have the bad stuff you consider in a film, it's either in the first act or a little bit in the second act. But the third act is great. It's easy to like digest it.
Because that ending really makes or breaks it, you know?
Yeah, but when it's in the third act, you're just like, like it becomes a little bit more difficult to digest. So I really want to give it a second viewing. But as a whole, I know that I do really, really enjoy the film. I love Mike Flanagan as a director. He took an impossible task and was able to not make it the biggest joke of 2019, which is quite the accomplishment.
We said on paper it shouldn't have worked.
It shouldn't have, but I feel like it worked. Mm-hmm. It definitely worked enough. I think the trouble some people are having with this film is it's connected to The Shining. And with The Shining, you had one of the greatest filmmakers ever made not ever made. Well, he wasn't made, but one of the greatest filmmakers who ever lived, making with a fairly simple project, the film, fairly simple with The Shining, and then you have a really good director with Mike Flanagan given an impossible project, and squaring those two, I think, can become difficult for people, and the results of what each of their films were. But I think, luckily enough, the story and the direction and the way it's shot, the way it's filmed, the way it's written is different enough where it feels like its own thing. So where it's almost like not even, I don't view it as like a sequel, although technically it is. It's more of like another story that's technically set within the same universe of what The Shining is. And it works really, really well. I loved all the actors. I thought the character stuff with Danny Torrance was great. It's truly some scary shit. I really enjoyed it. I agree with you that it's some of the most exciting I've had in the theater in a while. Few months, I think.
Easily.
Yeah. So yeah, I please go check it out. Please go watch it. If you're listening to this long after it's been in theaters, rent it, purchase it physically. If you don't like it, just resell it on eBay, but try and purchase it physically. Just give the movie money, please.
It'll probably be on HBO Max at some point, whenever it's
yeah.
on there. I agree with a lot of that, really. Pretty much along the same lines of it. Do you want to start this off by continuing about what's good in terms of like getting into spoilers, or do you want to just tackle on the issues you have immediately? Because they involve the ending.
Or, you know what? No, let's work up to it.
That's what you kind of want to build up to that moment. Okay, so getting into the film now, it starts off really exciting with the score of the Shining, just like, welcoming you back, and in some ways it kind of just picks up where it left off, with Danny and with Wendy after what happened at the Overlook Hotel, and what we see throughout the first act is him still seeing a lot of these ghosts that are haunting him after the Overlook. And one of the ghosts that comes to him is of, oh my goodness, the person who I'm forgetting of. It's Scatman Crothers. It was the actor that played him in the first film. It is a different actor playing him here. But I do not recall the name of the character. Peter, if you have your phone on you want to look up the name of the character, that would be pretty nice. But he comes to him. And
the name of Scatman Crothers?
Yes, absolutely. He comes to him and shows Danny how he can use his abilities to imprison these ghosts, while at the same time, as it's implied, I think not explicitly stated, that we have a new group of people, as Peter had previously mentioned before. They call themselves the True Knot, led by Rose the Hat, portrayed by Rebecca Ferguson. Yes?
Dick Halloran?
Yes, Dick Halloran.
Okay.
I see it. Dick Halloran is the name of who we're talking about here. But we have, essentially, our main adversaries in this film is Rebecca Ferguson's Rose the Hat, leader of the True Knot, who are these vampires, for lack of a better term, that seek out the Shining, the kids of the Shining, who have these abilities to read minds. And spoilers, they kill them. And as they kill them, they steal their steam, as they call it, as they are dying, as that's what makes steam pure, and that is how they are able to survive and live abnormally long lives. And so when we get to an older Danny, or Dan, Uncle Dan as he's referred to in this movie. He comes across somebody else who also shines, and they team up and they kill the bad guys.
This is your new superhero team.
Yeah, basically. You're right when you said that this is, but not really a sequel to The Shining, because what is obviously, and almost in a way, maybe this movie should have been called The Shining, because that's what's front and center in this movie.
Yeah. Why it was called the first one was The Shining, I'm not sure. There's a lot of, it could have been called like Overlook, like for the Overlook Hotel. Or stuff. I don't know. But it was called The Shining.
Part of why I love this so much is because I think it does what so little sequels to franchises, quote unquote, do these days. And that is, they take just a little bit of nostalgia and they carve out a new path for this new entry to stand on its own. And like, I understand that, you know, you're going to give a very good director an impossible task, but it's like, it was never, and I'm not saying it was on yours, it was never my expectation that this movie would be The Shining or be close to that. It's impossible to do that. And it's not, in my view, a fair criticism to do that, because that's not even what this movie is going for, because the clear differences in how Mike Flanagan deals in this film is it very much lands on Stephen King's interpretation of this story, that it's the supernatural elements that dominate the events that happen in the Shining, as opposed to more of the psychological terror that Kubrick had manifested in his film. And I think it does that in a way that it doesn't trash that movie, which is still pretty impressive. Because I could see many people say that, well, wait, this kind of ruins The Shining because it kind of just takes away all of the stuff. And the main differences in these movies is that the Kubrick's film was designed for you to take whatever you wanted out of it. This ain't. It's very much gives you some very straightforward answers, whether you wanted them or not, to what happened in The Shining.
But that's why I almost enjoy not looking at it as definitive sequel. It's like
right.
It's a possible sequel.
That exists.
To put it one way, like it's almost as if, yes, everything that you might take away, the different things you might take away from The Shining, those are still there. Like they're two separate things. But if someone came along, took the literal interpretation of The Shining and used that bedrock to tell their own story, that's what this is. And I think that works. I think it works really well. And because I always saw it that way, not as like, this has to be the sequel Shining. Like it never, except for the end, it never felt like weird or quote unquote ruining anything like that. In fact, it did some cool twisty stuff with it that I enjoyed.
It's kind of weird calling it a sequel because, like, first of all, The Shining never needed one, first and foremost. Second of all, this does such a good job of being its own thing, which is very much the rare these days. Like, while not maybe to the level, as you say, of a Blade Runner 2049, I think the comparison is pretty apt because it does what I think that movie did in terms of being its own thing, but still very much living in this universe. You know, kind of like what Stranger Things does, where, like, yes, there's nostalgia, but it's still Stranger Things. It's not like a copycat of Goonies or Gremlins or whatever. Like, there's inspiration on those things, but it's its own new terrain. And that's why when you and I talk about, like, the Disney live action remakes, which is entirely just hollow nostalgia and just copycat filmmaking and the worst of the worst in anything.
You know what? I will say, though, I think they're turning it around. Their Peter Pan remake looks pretty darn good. So
you're referencing the Wendy trailer from Fox Searchlight?
Is Fox Searchlight Disney now?
It is.
Then it's a Disney live action remake.
I'll tell you, I actually saw that trailer. I liked it.
It looked good. It looks good. It looks good. Oh, God. Cal's going to make me hate that movie, isn't he? I need to watch it way before he does, just so I
When's it coming out?
February.
Okay.
2020. Obviously. But the issue is, God, we never get those films here. So, I don't know. We'll see.
Eventually, it'll be distributed through some other means, of course, as we, do that. But yes, in very many ways, this film succeeds in being its own thing because of how, I think, the attention to detail.
Let's get into all that. Right away, the film, and this nostalgia did do it a little for me, but I got a little worried. I was like, oh no. It has like the old 80s looking Warner Brothers. And it was like, dun, 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 dun. But there's a reason for that, because it starts in the 1980s Shining film. You see flashbacks recreated by Mike Flanagan himself of a young Danny Torrance and his run-in with whatever is inside room 237. And it had like some of the scare. It started off with a pretty good scare, I felt. And it's effective horror. For me anyway, it's the door. You see a little bit more than what you saw in the original film, which is the door opens and you see the beginnings of the outline of the naked lady like lurch forward, and then it cuts. But the movie starts out pretty slow. You go from Danny being a child, talking to the ghost of, what is it, Scott?
Dick Halloran. Dick Halloran.
I can't say Scatman Crothers. I can't say that. Dick Halloran. But he teaches him to use his abilities, his shining abilities, to lock these people in a box. You see him grow up and be alcoholic. A lot of the issues he had. Oh, by people lock up in a box, I mean the ghosts from The Shining continue to haunt him and try and find him and take his shine, or basically devour him because of his shine. So he learns to, through his shine, lock them in a mental box where they can't escape. And you see his life progress from there. You see him deal with alcoholism, work to get better. You see him be an orderly at a hospice facility, and you slowly see him become a better person, all while he is sort of pen pals of sorts with this girl, Abra. And she is like the best shiner ever.
Apparently, she's like Ray.
Oh my god. Do not get me started.
Okay.
I won't.
There are a lot of them.
There are so many comparisons, but I won't get into it. While that's happening, you also see and get to know and understand the inner workings of the True Knot. That's the name.
Yes.
Of the little things, led by Rose the Hat. Remembered it this time. And they're basically similarly psychic individuals who feed on other people's shine, specifically children. And they feed by murdering them and just sucking up the it's like mist. What did they call it in the film? Steam. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to get into anything that happens during that particular chunk of the film?
I think we can go ahead and start off with probably an unlikely place to start off with, but I really have to say I appreciated the slow pace.
Oh, I did too.
It didn't feel slow to me. And when I say that, I was like, I wasn't bored. I was riveted by what was going on. Like, I was actually like living these scenes in a way. Some of my favorite scenes, strangely enough, were Dan is in the hospice facility, and then he and this cat, who basically is this allegory for the angel of death.
Another psychic cat.
Right. They because this cat knows that when somebody is about to go, and so I think for me some of the best scenes in the film were when Dan would comfort these people who were about to pass on. And I think in the first instance when he uses his shine ability to I don't want to say calm down, but to kind of like relax this person who's about to die, ease him. And it was kind of like something just beautiful about that, you know, him using his ability to comfort someone to where they're at peace as they're about to die. You know, there was something just so human about those scenes that I really loved.
Those were some of the best scenes in the film. And after we did After Dark, I was like, oh shoot, we forgot to talk about those scenes.
Oh yeah,
that's kind of the whole reason of the film, Doctor Sleep. That's where he gets his name. But it's these quieter moments of somewhat redemption for him, where he, through providing peace for others, he himself is able to find peace in a lot of ways. And it's really good. And I think because we saw how low he was, you know, in the very beginning of the film, that transformation, I think, works really well. I think maybe if you started the film there, it wouldn't work as well. I understand why you needed to see him at his lowest, understand what happened that made him sort of just like stop, like, no, like, this is my turning point. It really is an addiction story.
Yeah,
but a recovery story.
Right.
Like where
yeah, go ahead.
You could almost say, if you want to do parallels, The Shining is someone with an addiction falling into that addiction and failing.
Succumbing fully to it.
Yeah, this is someone that's able, it's a recovery story.
Yeah.
Someone who was in there and was able to climb their way out. And of course, you know, the ghosts and evil psychics are the allegories for his demons that he has to learn to live with, because he literally locks them up in a box and has them in there. Right. But he can never get rid of them. He can only live with them. It's a lot of on the nose stuff, but I think it's handled really well.
I agree entirely. And it's interesting as we see our Dick Halloran come into his life at certain points. Again, not to blow the can wide open, but like an Obi-Wan figure, if you will. And of course, Dan, portrayed by Ewan McGregor. The irony there isn't lost on me. Who, by the way, I should say, Ewan is great in this. You know, I forget sometimes what an amazing actor he is.
I haven't seen him in a thing in a while.
When was the last time we saw him in?
I don't remember.
He's going to be in Birds of Prey next year, I think, right?
Yes.
Right.
In the Obi-Wan series.
Yeah, it's been quite some time since I've seen him in anything. But yeah, he was great in this role. And, oh my goodness, I just really love this movie. Just trying to think about it. I really enjoyed it so much. There were so many times where I was just like, wow, this is really working for me. And one of the best parts is everything with the true knot.
I loved him. Well, just from an aesthetic point of view, like, it's not over the top, but it's like a group of very different looking people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it's like you have Lurch in there. And that's not like a knock at the way he looks or his height. He literally played Lurch from the Addams Family.
Is he the old man that?
Yes.
Okay.
With the cane.
Gotcha.
Grandpa Withers? Was it something like that?
Something like that, yes.
But he's great. And then you have everything from like a young teenage girl to just like regular dudes, people of all different ages and groups. So they have this like interesting cast of individuals, all led by Sam the Hat. And, you know, she herself has a very distinct look.
Rose the Hat.
Rose the Hat. I don't know why I keep saying Sam.
Sam the Hat?
I don't know why.
Okay.
And of course, with her distinct hat.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a very interesting aesthetic to them that it's not that it's silly, but it's more, what's the word?
Sinister?
Like supernatural stuff.
Okay.
And the performances by Rose the Hat, what's her name?
Rebecca Ferguson.
Yeah. Is absolutely great. And looking back, I'm actually surprised how much time they gave to the True Knot.
Yeah.
Really fleshing them out, who they are and what they did and how they did it and why they did it. I was actually really surprised that they did that, but I think it worked very well. And it was very interesting, this world with which they were in.
I think everything about them was perfect, honestly. There's nothing about them that I thought was off-putting or just wrong. And again, I think it helps that this is essentially, I think, a little less. It's not as long as It Chapter 2. It's still a 2.5 hour movie. But I think, unlike what happened in that film, Flanagan used the real estate in this film very wisely. And yes, they spend so much time with them, but I think it's because of that why we love them so much, because the care and attention that was placed on making sure that these villains were, you know, done right. I was listening to a podcast that said, who had read the novel Dr. Sleep, and he said that the Rose the Hat and the True Knot practically leapt off the pages of the book onto the screen.
Well, I think that's what I'm saying. It's like they have a sillier look to them, aesthetic. They're basically psychic vampires. Like if they literally just came in and said, "I'm the bad guys," like it might be harder to take serious them as a threat, but because you spend time with them and you view them as characters, you buy into everything that's going on with them. And you buy into the danger of the film.
And of course, I mean, you mentioned it already, but I mean, Rebecca Ferguson is outstanding. I think she really kind of makes that performance. And really, she was also terrific last year in Fallout, Mission Impossible Fallout. I don't remember what else she's been in, but this role for her was damn near perfect. Certainly, I think one of the more memorable on-screen villains we've had in quite some time. And I don't know, I mean, this is really kind of, you know, Stephen King did write these characters, but it might even be a testament to how much of a diehard Stephen King fan Mike Flanagan is, by how dedicated I think his interpretation was to the novel. But one of the things that I think also makes them interesting is, while they are the villains and they do terrible things, they still they feel fully realized to where they feel like real people in a way, and because they care for one another, they really are their own like fucked up family unit, you know, and they mourn whenever one of them dies, even though they're kind of like vultures and like they feed off whatever's left of it, but still, it's a loving kind of vulture-y way.
As much as there can be.
As much as there can be, but I think that really helps make them not only memorable, but like real players in this film. Because I feel like in any other, like, let's say any generic blockbuster, for example, they would have been so useless and boring and just horrible.
Yeah, they would have been real lame. They would have been like, well, they're there because there has to be a threat. Whereas with this, they feel like genuine characters, especially Rose the Hat.
Like one of my favorite scenes, well, there's a lot of scenes with Rose the Hat that are great in the film, but one of the ones that I think is a true testament to what I was just referring was, of course, when I think the father is passing on, and she's like, you know, giving this love, I think, last words about how, in reference to how long he has lived, which from what her words would indicate, were a very, very long time, seeing empires rise and fall. But her being visibly shaken by that loss, I think, in a weird way, humanized her, and then also the fear that they have, which would then again play into the final events and the resolution of the film.
But I think it also plays into the main character, which is Danny Torrance, because they're all about, preventing death, and they fear death, and at the same time that Danny is using his power to help people come to terms with that reality, they're using it to kill other people to prevent themselves from, coming to terms with that reality.
Absolutely.
So it's an interesting dynamic going on between those two.
And also another great dynamic in this film is the one between Dan and Abra. Abra, who is terrific in this.
She's really great. I think she was a great find as far as a child actress goes.
She's the true revelation in this movie. Kylie Curran. Kylie Curran is the actress that plays her.
By the way, she's an actress. She is a young female character who is extremely powerful.
Yes.
For simply because she is.
Mm-hmm. And no one's bitching about that, because why would they? But that's
I will say though,
yeah.
there's actually, funny enough, within the book, and I found this out, technically, you're gonna love this.
Oh God.
In the book, Danny Torrance is actually her uncle. They find out that her mom is his sister because his dad had an affair when they were younger, apparently. So he is technically her uncle.
So that's in the book.
That was in the book, yeah.
Yeah, that's not in the movie, clearly.
I did. Maybe it works in the book. I don't like it, so I'm glad it wasn't there.
Because, of course, familial ties.
Yeah.
And we've had enough of that, really.
Yeah.
I think this works a lot better. I mean, they are family in a way in this movie. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of makes it work all the better for it. They're not family because they're not blood.
Because it's the family you choose, right?
Exactly.
Whether with blood, it's like, oh, you have to have a connection with this person, rather than you choose to have a connection with this person. That's why I think that kind of works better.
Mm-hmm. It helps, though, that there is a little bit of a time jump in the beginning, where an 8-year time jump in this entire time that Dan and Abra communicate with each other through the shine abilities. So there was like, I mean, they didn't meet, technically speaking, but they had been in contact. And what Abra is a very talented shiner, if you will. Like, she is just basically, I mean, I guess the best way we could say is she's Rey from Star Wars, where she just has, she can do this, and it's just the way that it is. And she's so powerful in her abilities, she blows Rose the Hat away, which I thought that was surprising, and a hell of a sequence when that happens.
Yeah, that was easily one of the best sequences in the film. When Rose the Hat attempts to infiltrate, to not only find Abra, but infiltrate her mind and see if there's, information, anything they could use against her to get her, whatever. And then at the end of the day, it was actually just a trap set by Abra to go into her mind and find out shit about her. And visually, the way it's portrayed is really good and really interesting. And I was thinking about this, and I've seen a lot of films, I feel like, where there's psychics or people with sort of a power set similar to what is in The Shining. And this might be one of the best films visually to be able to portray that power set.
Mm-hmm.
They do so many really interesting things throughout the film. It feels like it's not always the same thing over and over again.
I want to say something real quick. Another Star Wars vibe that I got is whenever, like, when they would feel each other's presence, is like kind of like how the Force works, or when they would see each other's, like the Force Skyping, the Force call that we saw in Last Jedi. I mean, I know you felt that too when you saw it.
I mean, you know what? Future Star Wars projects, I would steal a lot from some of the shit this film had as far as portraying Force powers, and a lot of the trippy shit too. Like when that one point where Rose the Hat is just like going to, I believe, the grocery,
right,
and Abra like reaches out for her, and like her whole room like tilts, and then she falls, and then she is looking through the eyes of Rose the Hat. Like there's a lot of really cool sequences such as that.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned and others like it were moments that I had in this movie where I had to like pull myself out and just acknowledge, wow, this is fucking amazing what I'm seeing right now. Like, this is, like, a lot of this honestly shouldn't work, but it works so well. It's, I think, a difficult thing to pull off. A lot of visually anyway, a lot of these things that we're seeing. And not only to pull it off, but to make it look interesting, make it feel new, make it feel exciting. It's hard to do that. And I can only just imagine that if this were in the hands of a lesser director, you know what it would have been. It would have been just like, ugh. But thankfully it wasn't, in that regard. In the second act, the tables turn immensely, and Rose the Hat is the only surviving member of the True Knot. And also we lose some people. Cliff Curtis, who portrays Dan's best friend, also is lost, as well as Abra's father. And then we go off into the third act. One thing before we want to move on to that, what did you make of, because some people had issues with how a lot of the True Knot were dispensed with through the use of guns. I know Dan Myrtle in particular had an issue with that, saying that it kind of went off into being a little bit too much of an action-y trope.
I don't know if it's a trope, but because the whole sequence in which they are shooting them, it never felt like it was shot like an action film.
Right.
It was literally just boom, laid them out, you know? Just cornered them and shot them. I don't know how else you would do it. I mean, even with your psychic powers, apparently they can't stop bullets, so why not use a gun if you got them?
Absolutely, and I think it worked off what we were seeing.
Yeah, I think it was fine. I think it worked. I know that some people had an issue with the girl character who joins the True Knot.
What do you make of that?
I forget her name. Like, some people said like it felt like they were building up something with her, and then her character has like a weird or bad payoff. And I felt like it was never about building up her character. It was about introducing you to who the True Knot were and how they worked and what they did. And I think a lot of her
Snakebite.
Snakebite, yeah. But I think a lot of people took it as like, oh, she's supposed to be this important character. When I never saw it that way. I just saw it as through this initiation of one of the people, we're getting a glimpse into how these people operate. And I think that worked out really great.
Yeah, she would have been better off just ignoring them.
Yeah.
That didn't last long.
No, not really. I think for her, she was only like 10 years with them or something.
Probably the most horrific scene in the movie with the killing of a little boy.
Oh, God. The baseball boy.
Mm-hmm.
That was extremely horrific. And it went places that I did not expect the film to go. I was like, okay, now's the time to cut away. You're not cutting away. You're supposed to cut away. You're not supposed to show this. Cut away now. And it, like, excruciating detail. They tortured a child. It's not like they just killed the kid. It wasn't like they stabbed him and that's it. They tortured him for like a good 5 minutes, and he's there screaming, and it's Tremblay, isn't it?
Jacob Tremblay is the
Jacob
actor.
Tremblay,
yes. Uncredited,
who's an
but
amazing actor.
Yeah.
So it feels very realistic, and he's screaming and screaming, and there's like blood splurting on him, and it's like, oh, it's horrifying, and they're like just sucking up all of his steam. And it's bad. It's really horrific, and it's not scary again in the traditional sense, like, boo, a ghost jumped out and scared you, but in a like, this is pretty fucked up kind of way. In a way, maybe like Saw and those kinds of like torture porn films were trying to be originally before they just became torture porn.
I think this scene is kind of this is what I told Kyle about it. It's kind of like if you go back to Revenge of the Sith and you see that scene where Anakin is about to kill the younglings, except they don't cut away.
Yeah, like you see him like slash at them, and you hear
cut them to
kids
pieces.
Screaming. Yeah, like, oof, it's bad. It's real bad. But the fact that you're able to still view the True Knot as like characters, like human characters,
in spite of that,
is pretty astounding, because you're able to both have them not just feel like masked evil entities like a Michael Myers or a Freddy Krueger. Hell, Michael Myers didn't even fucking kill a kid. Oh, wait, no, yeah, he did.
Not in the original movie.
Not in the original movie, but he did in the remake. But I was thinking about when he saw a baby and he didn't stab the baby, in the new one. Do you remember that?
Yeah, no, but he did kill a kid.
But he did kill a kid. But with them, they're like faceless, empty evilness. But with these, they're definitely evil, but they also feel like they were human, which can be much scarier, because that's that kind of evil that most people deal with. That, well, not most people deal with, but that actually lives in the reality that we do in our world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is it time? Do we get to the third act?
I think it's time. To be fair, your issues are at the latter end of the third act.
Yes, the beginning of the third act, I think, works very well.
It was exciting, you go back to the Overlook, and it's kind of like parallel to the opening of The Shining, where you have the helicopter shot and you have the music come in, but this time it's at night and not during the day. But it still works all the same, though. It's exciting to see that. And then when they go to the Overlook,
and there's a story reason for them to go there.
Yes, it's not unnecessary, as we see, which I thought was brilliant in how they executed it personally. They go to the hotel, and I think for me, still one of the creepiest lines is where like Dan goes to Abra, I gotta wake it up.
And like the hotel just looks so imposing, like just lords over everything, so creepy. And the way he slowly just walks through the halls, as the lights flicker and gain energy as his shine wakes up the Overlook Hotel. It all works really, really well. All of that stuff, like the beginning of that third act, everything leading up to Rose the Hat. Rose the Hat coming inside the hotel and facing them. And then that's where it gets a little wonky for me.
Right. But in those moments, I remember in the theater, I was like, Dan needs to turn around and look at those photos on the wall in the lobby.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna see, if he like if they were gonna have a scene where he walks by and he sees his dad. I was genuinely curious if they were going to do that, because that's kind of why the ending is so controversial, right? Because it's like, well, what the fuck happened? He's in the... I was wondering if they would address that in any way, but they didn't address it, which I found interesting. But before Rose gets there, it has maybe one of the best scenes, I feel.
I agree.
in the film.
I agree with you. And I think this is an appropriate time to mention that, yeah, we do see Wendy Torrance in this movie, and we do see Jack Torrance in this movie. Recast.
Which, oof, if you had told me going in that they had done that, I don't know how I would have felt about it. I still kind of don't know. For me, it did work.
I agree with you entirely, because I think from the what I've been reading is the actress that took on Wendy was very good, and it was very well. Her performance, I think, was definitely there. The actor they got to do Jack Torrance, he wasn't terrible. He wasn't bad. It's hard to do Jack Nicholson, really? Like, really? It's like you're recasting Jack Nicholson.
How do you take on a role of Jack Nicholson without coming off like a parody?
Yeah.
Like, how? It's very hard. Oh, and do you know who the actor was?
No.
In that role?
Who was it?
It is Henry Thomas. Do you know who Henry Thomas is?
Is he? No, I don't.
He was the boy in E.T.
Elliot?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes. And he also plays the dad in The Haunting of Hill House. He has a really big role in the show. He plays the dad, yeah.
That's interesting. So Henry Thomas is doing this. Wow.
He's good. He is a really good actor.
The scene worked great. I mean,
yeah.
It's just, I'm not going to lie, though. It's just, it was distracting just somewhat. And I feel like this is a matter of debate, because I see many people like really bitch about, Grand Moff Tarkin and Rogue One. And I understand there's controversy surrounding that, but they were like, it was so distracting, and that CG, they should have just had an actor. I understand that, but like when I see this example, I felt that this was in a way even more distracting, because it's not Jack Nicholson.
I'll be honest. For the most part, I think, like CGI recreations are pretty creepy.
Yes.
But I've just got to be honest with the way I feel when I watch the film. They're less distracting to me.
I agree.
CGI recreations are far less distracting to me.
Yeah.
They really are. Because I'm like, oh, that's the character. Neat. And then I'm just there. And it's like, yeah, sometimes the CGI can look off, but it doesn't matter, because I am looking at that character. Which with this one, it's like, oh, it's a different actor. And all I'm thinking of is...
It's a different actor.
It's a different actor.
Yeah.
Like, how are they going to play it? And, like, a million questions ran through my mind.
Right? And I feel like while you're asking those questions, I'm not watching the scene as much as I should, And I should...
Yeah.
And I was riveted, and I loved that scene, and how much it meant for Dan. I was asking those questions internally, and it kind of got in the way of it. And I think the best example of, like, how CGI recreations can work. Remember Rachel in 2049?
Yeah, they were great. And it's like, if you had just recast the role, I'd be like, oh, this is supposed to be Rachel.
But it's not.
It kind of looks like her. Yeah, The only one that, like, I did not notice it at all was Dick
Halloran.
Dick Halloran. To me, like, he became him.
Right.
Like, I saw the same character. And there were moments with Wendy. Like, I think when she was, like, running towards him.
Right.
Because he was out on the bench alone.
Mm-hmm.
She's like, Danny. It's like, okay, I see it. But Jack Nicholson is just so goddamn distinct.
Yeah.
I think it worked well when they didn't show his face.
You can tell how they were holding the camera, how they tried not to show too much of his face, especially in that scene.
Mm-hmm. It wasn't until like the very last second that he goes a little full Nicholson, and then they show him up front.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like at the very end where he like knocks it, and he really just starts screaming at him. But the whole scene is like him facing his the last ghost of his past, which is his dad. And, earlier in the film, he says something along the line of like, I feel closest to him when I'm drunk, when I'm drinking. And there's a lot of great lines like that. And it's just this final offering of the quote unquote medicine that he refuses. That I think that it works so well and it completes his journey of recovery in that instance. I think it worked really great.
And it also reminds me of an earlier scene, as you just mentioned, in the film where he is in an AA meeting and he talks about how his father, and that was an emotional scene.
That one was great too.
So it's like, it just reminds you that this movie was doing a lot of great work, leading up into it. And I guess at this moment we can talk about the moment where it seems to veer off for somebody. I don't I get the impression that people are like, this movie is great up until it hits that moment, and then I don't know how to feel about it. I don't understand that. I understand it being distracting. I understand it taking away from some of what you loved about it, but I don't understand some people that think that that the third act left people in a way that they're not sure how to feel about the movie overall, because I get the criticisms and I get where you're coming from. I don't understand how that ruins the great stuff that happened in Act 3. For me, I understand that. Well, let's get into it. What happened that was so bad with, or that you didn't like per se, in the third act?
So the third act. Well, what happens is there's Danny Torrance, and of course he grabs an axe. Get it? Just like his old daddy. And he's there with Abra to defend or to stop Rose the Hat. And there's little things like, there's one scene where when Rose enters the hotel, she passes by the elevator and the blood comes rushing out, and she's just like, oh, yeah, that's something. And then keeps walking. And it's like, it felt like the director had done such a good job of not indulging in a lot of silly nostalgia for the sake of nostalgia. And then like the second part of the third half, he just had to let it out. And there's a lot of stuff like that. And most notably, what happens is they try to trap Rose the Hat in one of his mind boxes.
Right.
But they're not able to, so she attacks him, starts to
kill him.
But then he unlocks all the boxes and lets out the ghosts. And I need to watch it again, but even the first viewing, I'm like, oh no, it looks really silly. Because all the ghosts are just sort of huddled around together, then standing there. And the way they shot it was really silly looking, I felt.
Okay.
And it kind of looked more like a shining party, Halloween party.
Okay.
But like, again, on paper, the fact that he releases them to consume her, I think works really well.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe much like the rest of the film, it maybe should have been more of a slow burn, where like once she enters the house, he releases all the ghosts, and it's her just sort of like in a house of horrors trying to escape.
That's what I thought was going to happen.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think that the way that you suggested it might have been the better way to have done it, because I think what happens is, while I was excited watching what was happening, it probably would have been better to make it a little bit longer, because you need to, but to like really make the presence and the power and the evil of the Overlook felt in a slow burn, where like she's slowly she's fending off some of them, but she's getting weaker and weaker with each one, and then it just gets to a point where she's just finally wiped out.
Yeah.
because of the evil that resides in the Overlook. And there could have been better ways to shoot that. I agree with that. In fact, I might have preferred it to what we got, because I think it didn't look silly to me. And like, you make it sound, I think, sillier than what it actually was, from what I recall anyway. But I do agree that it kind of just happened all in an instant, and then that was it.
Yeah, and I think that's my biggest complaint. Right.
Okay.
And as far as you saying, like, oh, for some people this ruined it for him, I think it just goes back to that age-old thing of it's how the movie leaves you, right? So you can have an amazing movie, but if it falls apart in that third act, that's all everyone's going to be talking about.
But do you feel that the movie collapses because of that?
I don't think it collapses. No. Because again, on paper, I like everything, right? Mm-hmm. It's just mostly visually, the way it was shown. Some things they showed too much, and some they should have showed a little more. And then also just be a little bit more original with how you display said ghosts. I didn't want to see The Shining again. I wanted to see The Shining through the eyes of Mike Flanagan.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's like, oh, well, like, no, we're at the hotel, so we have to visually portray it the same way that Kubrick did. And I'm like, well, like, they can have the same costumes and they can look the same and have the same music.
The bigger critique is that it was a missed opportunity for somebody like Flanagan to create something new, originally horror, scary-looking ghosts in a new interpretation instead of just relying on what was already established.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah. Again, the film does not, like, collapse at all. It's just like, unfortunately, my biggest complaints of the film came, like, right there at the end.
I think the point where I come closest to agreeing with you is afterward, where I believe it's Abra who's encountering these old ghosts, and they're like, "Hey, there's this guy." Remember
they're doing
me?
the same thing as the original film. Yeah. It's like,
that was a bit much for me. I will say, that didn't necessarily. I didn't find that necessary at all. But what I loved was the end of Dan Torrance.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That brings it back.
That was pitch perfect how it was handled in every way, in terms of how he distracts the ghosts. He burns down the Overlook, him consuming himself with it. And of course, the last shot with young Danny, and then his mother. And that's it. That was beautifully shot. I thought that, and wrapped it up as best as you could.
And you know why that worked? That was very much Mike Flanagan.
Yeah.
I felt. And I think that all that stuff worked really well. And then that's also, it wraps around to the original book ending.
Right.
Because that's what happened in the original book. It like burned down and stuff like that. And then like it cuts from that to him talking to Abra.
Right.
And being like, there are probably a lot of other things in this world, much like Rose the Hat, much like the Overlook Hotel. But there are also things like you. And, basically shine on. Don't run away from it. And yeah, just now he's taking on the Dick
Halloran.
What's his Halloran?
Well,
role.
he's Obi-Wan.
He's Obi-Wan now, yeah.
That's basically what he is. But I think there's also just a subtle beauty about the film overall. Something that's lingering in the background about kind of hopeful about there being the potential of life after death and how it just kind of is that way. It's like, you don't see that at all, hardly anymore in film, especially horror films, or especially science fiction films. But there's something kind of peaceful about that in a way, because I think they're yeah. Go ahead.
It's horror, but like I said, it's this is kind of a weird phrasing, but hopeful horror, so to speak.
Yeah.
Which goes along with the story of Danny Torrance and recovery and what his journey. And it's nice. It's sweet. It's something you don't usually get from these kinds of stories that I think works really well.
It's certainly not what you got from The Shining.
Oh, hell no.
And I think because it is that way, it's so uncharacteristic of what we've come to expect from this genre to end in such a way. And I think that's what makes it stand out just a little bit more, because it does that. I don't know, man. I understand those issues, but like, to me, they just seem rather minuscule compared to like all the great stuff that happens in this. To like, yeah, I think this is great. And for me, one of the best films this year so far. Surprised to see a little bit of a mixed reaction, though, from the critics, though. Not too much. And even more so the fact that nobody gave a damn to go watch this movie. And so I think we found our bad times at the El Royale of this year.
Yay!
So fucking
So that
depressing.
means next year Fox is going to be bought out by Disney?
You mean Warner Brothers?
Warner Brothers, sorry.
Yeah. And then
If
we all
continue
die.
the trend.
That's wonderful. I'll say I love this film. I can't say how many times I can say it, but it's going to be in my top 10 of the year for sure. I mean, to me, with Shining, with Doctor Sleep, and with so many of these films, I am really beginning to, appreciate more and more this genre. God damn it. Am I really falling in love with it? So those are my thoughts. Any last thoughts you have, Peter?
I really enjoyed this film. I really did. For all the talk we have about like, sequels and reboots and remakes and all that jazz, there are genuinely good ones done. Like, there really are. I think this one was great. It was so much better than it had any right to be. Same goes for Blade Runner 2049, Mad Max Fury Road, The Last Jedi. There's a lot of great films out there. And
all of those that you just
do...
mentioned, what's important about those sequels that you mentioned, sequels to very old franchises.
Yeah. Yes.
Classics.
Yeah. Well,
even.
that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's like, that's the issue, right? It's like, well, this film's, it's done. It's a classic. Why are you going back to it? Even the Planet of the Apes trilogy. Like, there is examples of being able to go back to these old properties and breathing some new, interesting, well-done life into them. So yeah, all I can do is really encourage you to go and see those and support those. And hopefully that kind of filmmaking continues to be done. A sequel or no sequel.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. Catch our podcasts anywhere and everywhere you listen to podcasts, whether it be on Apple or Spotify, Google, and on YouTube, of course. And the next time that you'll see us, or you'll hear us, rather, I should say, our second edition of the Scorsese Files. And more stuff coming up this month with Knives Out, Frozen 2, The Mandalorian, and The Irishman, and so many, many, many more. And the next time, I believe we will have a review of Dolomite. My name is Dolomite, or Dolomite is my name, whichever way it's called, in the next podcast. So until then, thank you, Peter, for being here. Thank you to the audience for putting up with us for another hour and a half. And keep it right here under the spotlight. Bye-bye.